Welcome. Today we're diving into the fascinating world of consumer choice in economics. At the heart of this topic lies the concept of utility, which is simply a measure of satisfaction or happiness that a consumer derives from consuming goods and services. Every decision we make as consumers is influenced by our desire to maximize the utility, given the resources we have. But how do we make these choices? That's where indifference curves and budget constraints come into play. Let's start by understanding what utility means and why it's so central to economic theory. Difference curves are a key tool economists use to visualize consumer preferences. Imagine you're choosing between two goods, say apples and oranges. An indifference curve shows all the combinations of these two goods that give you the same level of satisfaction. In other words, you're equally happy with any combination on the same curve. The curve helps us see how much of one good you'd be willing to give up to get more of the other, without changing your overall happiness. Difference curves have some important properties. First, they slope downward, reflecting the trade-off between goods. If you want more apples, you must give up some oranges to stay equally satisfied. Second, they never cross each other because that would violate the logic of consistent preferences. Third, curves farther from the origin represent higher utility levels, since they include more of both goods. These properties help us analyze consumer behavior in a structured way. Crucial concept related to indifference curves is the marginal rate of substitution, or misses. This measures how much of one good a consumer is willing to give up to get an extra unit of another good while keeping utility constant. On the curve, it's the slope at any given point. As you move along the curve, the misses usually decreases, meaning you're less willing to give up more of one good as you have less of it. Now let's bring in the real-world limitation, your budget. A budget constraint shows all the combinations of goods you can afford, given your income and the prices of those goods. It's usually represented as a straight line on a graph with one good on each axis. The slope of this line depends on the relative prices of the two goods. The budget constraint sets the boundary for your choices. Budget line can be described mathematically. Suppose you have an income of $100, apples cost $2 each and oranges cost $4 each. The equation would be 2a plus 4o equals 100, whereas the number of apples and o is the number of oranges. Any combination of apples and oranges that fits this equation is affordable. This equation helps us visualize and calculate the possible choices you can make. What happens if your income changes or if the price of one good changes? The budget line shifts. If your income increases, the line moves outward, allowing you to afford more of both goods. If the price of apples rises, the line pivots inward on the apple axis, reducing the number of apples you can buy. These shifts are crucial for understanding how external factors affect your choices. Real magic happens when we combine indifference curves with budget constraints. The goal is to find the point where the highest possible indifference curve just touches the budget line. This point represents the best combination of goods you can afford, maximizing your utility given your budget. It's the sweet spot where your preferences and your financial reality meet. The optimal point, the indifference curve, is tangent to the budget line. This means the slope of the indifference curve, the misses, equals the slope of the budget line, the price ratio. Mathematically, this is where the rate at which you're willing to trade one good for another matches the rate at which the market allows you to trade them. This condition ensures you're getting the most satisfaction for your money. Utility maximization is the process of choosing the combination of goods that puts you on the highest possible indifference curve, given your budget. It's the central idea behind consumer choice theory. By analyzing where your budget line and indifference curves meet, economists can predict what choices you'll make and how you'll respond to changes in income or prices. Let's visualize this. On a graph, the budget line appears as a straight line, while indifference curves are typically convex to the origin. The point of tangency between the highest attainable indifference curve and the budget line is the optimal consumption bundle. This graphical approach makes it easier to see how changes in income or prices affect your choices. When your income increases, your budget line shifts outward, parallel to the original line. This means you can now reach higher indifference curves, increasing your utility. Conversely, a decrease in income shifts the budget line inward, limiting your choices and reducing your maximum attainable utility. This relationship helps explain how consumers adjust their spending as their financial situation changes. Change in the price of one good causes the budget line to pivot. If apples become cheaper, you can afford more apples for the same income, so the budget line pivots outward on the apple axis. If apples become more expensive, the line pivots inward. This effect is central to understanding how consumers respond to price changes in the marketplace. Not all goods respond the same way to income changes. Normal goods are those you buy more of as your income rises, like organic fruit or new clothes. Inferior goods are those you buy less of as your income increases, such as instant noodles. Understanding these categories helps economists predict consumer behavior in different economic situations. When the price of a good changes, two effects come into play: the substitution effect and the income effect. The substitution effect is when you switch to a cheaper good, while the income effect is the change in your purchasing power. Both effects influence how much of each good you buy after a price change, and together they explain the overall change in consumption. Sometimes, the optimal choice is at a corner of the budget line, meaning you spend all your money on just one good. This happens when the indifference curves are so steep or flat that the highest utility is reached by consuming only one product. Corner solutions are important in cases where consumers have strong preferences for one good over another. Perfect substitutes are goods that a consumer is willing to substitute for each other at a constant rate. For example, if you view tea and coffee as perfect substitutes, you might always be willing to trade one cup of tea for one cup of coffee. The indifference curves for perfect substitutes are straight lines, reflecting this constant trade-off. Perfect complements are goods that are always consumed together in fixed proportions, like left and right shoes. The indifference curves for perfect complements are L-shaped, reflecting the fact that having more of one without the other doesn't increase your satisfaction. This concept helps explain certain purchasing patterns in the real world. Let's apply these ideas to a real-life scenario. Imagine you have a weekly food budget and must choose between buying bread and cheese. Your budget constraint limits how much of each you can buy, while your indifference curves reflect your personal taste preferences. By finding the point where your highest indifference curve touches your budget line, you determine the best mix of bread and cheese for your satisfaction. On a graph, you plot bread on one axis and cheese on the other. Your budget line shows all the combinations you can afford, and your indifference curves show your preferences. The tangency point is your optimal choice. This visual approach makes it easier to understand how economic theory applies to everyday decisions. Suppose the price of cheese drops. Your budget line pivots outward on the cheese axis, allowing you to buy more cheese for the same budget. This change can move you to a higher indifference curve, increasing your utility. The way you adjust your purchases depends on your preferences and the relative prices of bread and cheese. Consumer equilibrium is reached when you have allocated your budget in a way that maximizes your utility, given the prices of goods and your income. At this point, you have no incentive to change your consumption pattern, as any other combination would either lower your utility or exceed your budget. While indifference curves and budget constraints provide a powerful framework, real-life decisions are often more complex. Factors like uncertainty, changing preferences, and external influences can affect choices. Still, this model gives us a solid foundation for understanding the basics of consumer behavior. Economists and policymakers use these concepts to predict how consumers will respond to changes in taxes, subsidies, or welfare programs. By understanding utility maximization and budget constraints, they can design policies that better meet people's needs and improve overall welfare. Behavioral economics adds another layer to our understanding. It recognizes that people don't always act rationally or have perfect information. Factors like habits, emotions, and social influences can lead to choices that deviate from the standard model. Still, indifference curves and budget constraints remain useful starting points. While we focused on two goods, the same principles apply when choosing among many goods. The mathematics becomes more complex, but the idea remains: consumers allocate their budgets to maximize utility given prices and income. This extension helps explain a wide range of real-world consumption patterns. Understanding these concepts can help you make smarter spending decisions. By thinking about your own preferences and budget constraints, you can allocate your resources in a way that brings you the most satisfaction. It's not just theory, it's a practical tool for everyday life. Let's recap. Indifference curves show your preferences, budget constraints show your limits, and the point where they meet is where you maximize utility. Changes in income or prices shift your budget line and affect your choices. These tools are fundamental for understanding consumer behavior in economics. In summary, indifference curves and budget constraints provide a powerful framework for analyzing how consumers make choices. By understanding these concepts, you gain insight into the logic behind everyday decisions and the broader patterns of economic behavior. Whether you're an economist or just curious about how people spend their money, these ideas are essential. As you move forward, keep these concepts in mind. They form the foundation for more advanced topics in economics, such as market demand, welfare analysis, and public policy. By mastering indifference curves and budget constraints, you're well equipped to tackle more complex economic questions in the future.